There's a quiet truth that shapes the map of our world, a truth so familiar we barely question it anymore. Some nations rise, some nations stall, and some try everything: reforms, aid, loans, elections, revolutions, yet remain trapped in the same cycle of poverty no matter what they do. You can see it from satellites, glittering highways in one country, darkness just across the border. You can see it in statistics. The average citizen in a wealthy nation may earn in a single month what others earn in 2 years. Why does this happen? Why do some nations break free, while others sink deeper? To understand the answer, we must travel back through a story built on geography, conquest, institutions, and invisible systems that shape opportunity long before a child is born. Because poverty is not an accident, and prosperity is never a coincidence. In the 1500s, the world split in two. One part, Europe and later North America, entered a period historians call the Great Divergence. Trade expanded, ideas spread, capital flowed, institutions formed. But across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, a different history unfolded. Colonial empires did not build systems of growth. They built systems of extraction. Railways were laid not to connect people, but to move resources: gold, rubber, spices, oil. Borders were drawn not around cultures, but around mines and ports. By the time the colonial era ended in the mid-20th century, many nations inherited borders that made no sense, governments with no legitimacy, economies designed to serve foreign powers, not their own people. This is where the trap began. After independence, dozens of nations attempted to rebuild from the ruins, but they faced impossible obstacles. The Cold War turned smaller nations into chess pieces as superpowers imposed influence through aid with strings attached, coups, and ideological pressure. The commodity curse revealed a painful truth. Countries rich in oil, copper, or diamonds often saw their wealth narrow the economy, empower elites, weaken democracy, and fuel corruption. Then came the debt explosion. In the 1970s and 80s, global interest rates surged, and nations across Africa and Latin America suddenly owed more than they had ever borrowed, spending more on interest payments than on education or healthcare. Structural adjustment imposed strict conditions, cutting public spending, selling national assets, and slashing subsidies. Some reforms helped, many damaged fragile systems. Meanwhile, the brain drain accelerated as doctors, engineers, and teachers, people critical to rebuilding society, migrated in search of opportunities. The cycle deepened. Many assume poverty results from laziness or bad leadership, but the reality is far more complex. Geography limits landlocked nations with high trade costs, while tropical diseases reduce productivity and harsh climates damage infrastructure. Institutions matter deeply. Strong nations rely on predictable laws and governance, while weak institutions create space for corruption and instability. Human capital shapes the future. Underfunded schools, low literacy, and poor healthcare reduce generational opportunities. Colonial borders created ethnic fragmentation, artificial boundaries, and long-term political instability. The global trade system rewards manufacturing and technology while penalizing raw materials, meaning a nation selling cocoa beans earns far less than one selling chocolate bars. Elite capture concentrates wealth in the hands of a few, turning politics into a tool for protecting privilege rather than expanding opportunity. And while foreign aid saves lives, poorly structured aid can also create dependence instead of sustainable growth. Today, the divide remains sharper than ever. Yet some nations, South Korea, Singapore, Rwanda, Vietnam, broke the cycle and transformed their futures within a generation. Others remain stuck, not because they're doing nothing, but because they're trying to grow inside systems designed long ago to keep them dependent. New pressures are emerging. Climate change hitting vulnerable countries hardest, global interest rates rising, automation threatening manufacturing jobs, geopolitical tensions reshaping trade routes, and debt crises returning in countries from Sri Lanka to Zambia. Once again, the world is at an economic crossroads. And once again, the poorest nations stand on the fault lines. The world map is not just political lines. It is a memory, a record of advantage and disadvantage passed down for centuries. Some nations climb quickly because they began their climb long ago. Others start at the bottom of a staircase that stretches back into wounds they never inflicted. But history is not destiny, because the same story that trapped nations for centuries also holds lessons for escape. Invest in people, build strong institutions, diversify economies, strengthen democracy, and create systems larger than individuals and longer lasting than elections. Poverty is not a permanent condition. It is a system, and systems can be redesigned. The nations that rise tomorrow will be those who refuse to accept the world as it is and instead imagine what it can become. To understand why some nations remain stuck, you must look beyond borders, GDP charts, or even history books. Some of the most powerful forces shaping national destiny are invisible, operating quietly through global systems many citizens never even hear about. Capital flight is one of them. Every year, billions of dollars leave developing nations through offshore bank accounts, illegal transfers, corporate tax avoidance, and shadow intermediaries. According to global financial watchdogs, some of the poorest nations lose more money to illegal outflows than they receive in aid. This means a country can work hard, produce goods, educate workers, but if wealth silently leaks out faster than it comes in, the nation grows hollow from within. Then comes the global interest trap. When the global economy tightens, as it did in the 1980s, 2008, and 2022, interest rates rise. For wealthy nations, this is an inconvenience. For poor nations, it's a nightmare. Imagine owing $10 billion. Then overnight, your interest payments double. Suddenly, money meant for hospitals, roads, and schools is rerouted into loan repayments. Budgets shrink, progress reverses, and when sanctions hit, the damage deepens. Sanctions do not simply punish leaders. They choke entire economies, blocking access to trade, raising prices, weakening currencies, and pushing industries into collapse. When an economy suffocates, poverty deepens, and the climb out becomes twice as steep. In some places, poverty isn't just an economic problem, it becomes a political strategy. Patronage systems keep leaders in power by distributing favors, jobs, contracts, subsidies. This creates dependence, and dependence discourages reform. Manipulated elections often follow, because when political survival depends on controlling resources, leaders resist policies that strengthen transparency. Democracy struggles. Corruption spread. Meanwhile, the informal economy dominates daily life. In some nations, up to 60% of economic activity takes place outside formal systems, unregistered, untaxed, unprotected. This means governments cannot raise enough revenue to invest in healthcare, technology, infrastructure, or long-term development. The nation becomes trapped between two worlds, too fragile to formalize, too informal to grow. But not all nations remain stuck. Some broke the cycle dramatically. South Korea, in the 1950s poorer than parts of sub-Saharan Africa, became a global technological powerhouse by investing in education, manufacturing, and strong institutions while protecting young industries before exposing them to global competition. Singapore, a tiny island with no natural resources, built a world-leading economy through rule of law, anti-corruption frameworks, and strategic global positioning. Rwanda, devastated after the 1994 genocide, pursued strong governance, stability, and reforms that transformed it into one of Africa's fastest-growing economies. Vietnam, once war-torn and isolated, became a manufacturing hub reshaping global supply chains. These nations show that history is not destiny, but reform takes decades, not years. The climb must be deliberate, disciplined, and painfully consistent. Today, global poverty is no longer defined simply by geography. You find pockets of deep poverty inside wealthy nations, regions abandoned by investment, And you find pockets of rapid growth inside developing nations, cities rising faster than the world can track. The world is fragmenting into two spheres. Sphere 1, nations that adapt, investing in technology, education, renewable energy, good governance, and diversified industries. These nations understand that the future thrives on knowledge, not resources. Sphere 2, nations that struggle to keep up, relying heavily on commodities, foreign aid, unstable politics, weak institutions, and outdated industries. They are vulnerable to every shock: climate disasters, oil price drops, interest rate hikes, pandemics. The gap between these spheres is widening. Despite the challenges, a quiet revolution is happening, one that could rewrite the fate of nations. Digital infrastructure is rising even in fragile economies through mobile banking, digital ID, online trade, and remote education. These tools bypass traditional weaknesses and give millions access to services previously unimaginable. Youth demographics are another force. Many poorer nations have enormous young populations who, if educated, empowered, and supported, could trigger economic explosions similar to East Asia in the late 20th century. Green energy is shifting global dynamics, potentially liberating nations long dependent on oil and enabling new industries with less volatility. Regional integration, like AFCFTA, shows enormous promise in reshaping internal markets, suggesting that the next economic miracle may emerge from places the world least expects. Poverty is not a single story. It is a web of forces, historical, political, economic, and global, pulling a nation forward or holding it back. But the truth is simple and powerful. No nation is condemned to remain poor. What matters is not where a country starts, but the systems it builds, the leaders it empowers, the institutions it strengthens, and the future it imagines for the next generation. History shows that prosperity is possible, but it comes slowly, quietly, through decisions made over decades, not headlines made overnight. The map of the world is still changing, and the nations that rise tomorrow may be those fighting hardest today for a different path.